Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, no Dodger game today, so we are talking about a lot of different things. We got a couple listener questions, one about Bueller's contract, one about the relief pitching and how much it benefits from good defense. We're going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about the 2023 Dodgers schedule that was released, some of the interesting points of that schedule, and we're going to compare the hot stretches for 2013, 2017, and this season. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time watching or listening, I am Jeff Snider. That guy next to me is Vince Samperio. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Vince, we are recording this on Thursday afternoon. No Dodger game today, so we didn't have to stay up late to record tonight, which is kind of nice for both of us. I think you're heading out on vacation, and I'm heading to a actual good night's sleep for once in my life. So should be fun. But first, we're going to talk about the Dodgers. Plenty to talk about still. We kind of actually put a few things aside this week saying, okay, well, we've got an off day on Thursday, so we'll have plenty of time to cover everything, because the fact is the games this week have been really entertaining. It's hard to squeeze much other than game talk into some of these days. So an off day every once in a while is nice for podcasting purposes to catch up on a lot of things. So I think the first thing to catch up on is the Dodgers schedule for 2023 was released on Wednesday, yesterday, as we're recording this. And, they call it the preliminary schedule, although most years it ends up being the final schedule. This year was actually an exception to that, where they actually did have to change a bunch of stuff because of the lockout, but there is no labor strife looming. And so we can assume this will be the final schedule. And I don't know, Vince, maybe I think you and I both looked at this and noted a few things. So maybe just back and forth a little bit on some things that we thought were notable.
Yeah, so I mean, first thing that's notable, we talked about this when the lockout ended and it was part of the CBA, but every team will play every team starting next season. That doesn't mean every team is going to visit Dodger Stadium every year, but it does mean the Dodgers will play every team. There'll be some teams where they just play them away, just play them at home. But, that's obviously the first thing that stands out, which means they're going to play the Yankees every year. They're going to play the Astros every year. They're going to play, all these other American League teams that they don't normally play every single year, that they usually have to wait 3 years in between. When it comes to the Yankees, it'll probably be a matter of 1 year they play them here and there, though next year they play them just there. The next year they play them just here, type of thing, which is what it is next year. I believe Yankees come to Dodger Stadium in June, and those games are always huge. Now, the fact that it could also be a World Series rematch, that remains to be seen. But even if it's not, I remember every time the Yankees come to town, I usually don't end up going because tickets are usually pretty astronomical. But I do remember the last time I went was like 2000, whatever, early 2010s. And I went to a game, and I remember it being really packed and really crazy. And I think every other year has been like that. So that's the one that stands out, right away. There's another one that stands out, but I'm sure you'll bring it up or I'll bring it up when I come back around. But Dodgers Yankees always fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I think my understanding is it's just alternating series there, 1 year series here, the next year. And the only team that we will have the home and home against is the Angels every year. They'll keep that rivalry series. And then, but yeah, it's 46 interleague games, up from 20. So more than twice as many interleague games. And yeah, the one I was going to bring up is the one you hinted at, I assume, another interleague series, which is the Astros coming to town. And that one is always pretty passionate these days. It's it's funny how those things happen. That when the Dodgers and Astros were in the same division for like 30 years before before the Astros moved to the NL Central, then eventually to the AL West. Uh, I don't think their rivalry was ever as strong as it is right now. And by rivalry, I mean the fans hating each other. And that this one, it turns into a pretty exciting series. That'll be on June 23rd through 24th. So the same month as the Yankees. 3 weeks after the Yankees come to town, the Astros come to town. And when you look at just the month of June, you've also got a Giants series in there. That's and one of the Angels series. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in June next year. But yeah, 23rd through 25th, a weekend series at home against the Astros. As a season ticket holder, I am just seeing dollar signs here. A weekend series with the Yankees, and then 3 weeks later, a weekend series with the Astros, with a weekend series with the Giants in between them. Oh man, I guess I'm gonna have to renew my season tickets after all, so I can pay for my kids to go to college.
Yeah, and that just inclines me more so to keep my job here with BR Walkoff in order to be media for all those games and not have to pay a pretty cent to go watch them. But yeah, that's those two are fun. The next one is not one at Dodger Stadium, but Mookie Betts returned to Boston, and it's in August, end of August, I believe. Mookie hasn't played in Boston since being traded, and in the time frame since Mookie was traded to now, Red Sox fans have gone through a lot of different it's been different moods that they've had. It was one where Mookie struggled a little bit, started 2020, and Verdugo started, I think, a little bit hot, and that the comparison started right away. And Mookie got hot. Dodgers won the World Series. Boston fans will deflect it more than likely with the way most other team fans of other teams deflect it. But then, Mookie struggled, and whatever the case was, there's been times where Red Sox fans have said, Mookie Betts deal was cool, was fine. There's been some fans that have been against it the entire time. Whatever the case was, I think Bill Simmons, the sports writer, the other day put a tweet out like, the Mookie Betts trade was like the worst trade or something like that for Red Sox. Basically, something to that extent. So they've gone through a range of emotions, but it'll be cool for him. I'm sure they'll embrace him, but also for us to be like, haha, Red Sox fans, Mookie Betts is ours.
Yeah, Bill Simmons said that trade still haunts him, and he referred to it as I know it was a effing something. It was a catastrophe, maybe. It's that always makes people smile. And yeah, my next thought on the schedule isn't necessarily a particular series, but just the fact that they do play every other team in baseball now means that they had to cut down some games against some other teams, and those cuts came to intra-division games. Whereas for the last long time, the Dodgers have played 19 games a year against every other team in the division. That goes down to 14 games. And it doesn't seem like a huge drop, but basically you went from 19 games against 4 teams is well over half your schedule. Or not well over, almost exactly half the schedule, just under half the schedule. Now 14, it's basically a third of the schedule, which is a big difference, especially right now. We're looking at, the Dodgers and Padres play 9 more times this season in the last 39 games. And we're not going to have as much of that. We're going to see less of the intra-division rivalries. And in some ways, that's a little bit of a bummer. Dodger Giants games are always fun. There is some of that added juice. I do think that overall the trade-off is worth it to get the chance to play every other team. My last note on the schedule would be that next year the Blue Jays come to Los Angeles rather than the Dodgers going to Toronto, which means that if Canada's COVID restrictions are still in place, we don't have to worry about finding out which Dodgers aren't vaccinated and therefore can't go to Canada because they won't play in Canada until 2024.
Yeah, Blake Treinen and who basically would be what that becomes. Real quick, Bill Simmons said the Mookie trade is the worst Boston trade of my lifetime in any sport. It was an unconscionable catastrophe of a trade when it happened, and now in August 2022, it's somehow even worse. They got 12 cents on the dollar. It's a effing apocalypse. The owner should apologize.
Apocalypse. I knew it was some word like that. That's great, man. Yeah. And he's right, And for some reason we're smiling real big about that. So that should be fun. August 25th, I think, that around that time
23rd or 25th, I believe.
So yeah. Uh enough schedule talk, right?
Hmm?
Plenty more to look at. It's the schedule is available on Dodgers.com and anywhere else you want to look. It's all over the place. So check it out. Let us know what you're excited about. We're going to come back in just a minute. We are going to take a couple listener questions about the relief pitching and about Walker Buehler's contract. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. And please keep it Locked On Dodgers. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Vince, we are back. I want to jump into we got a couple listener questions, and let's start with this one from at Stephen R. Cole on Twitter. Loyal listener, appreciate him. He asks, how much of the Dodgers bullpen success can be attributed to the team's defense, and how much is just great pitching? Any fancy stats that break those two things apart? And this is it's an interesting question. You never. There are plenty of stats that try to assess the impact of defense, and one stat that's pretty straightforward is FIP, fielding independent pitching. That basically it doesn't look at it only looks at what it considers the three things a pitcher can control: walks, strikeouts, and home runs. And basically, the theory behind FIP is once the ball's in play, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think I don't think we understand all the ways the pitcher can affect his BABIP, batting average on balls in play. But I think you look at Craig Kimbrell this year, for example, his BABIP is like 373, when for his career it was like 260 before this season. 260 is a little bit lower than average, and that made sense because he had really good stuff. That even when players make contact, it's weaker contact. So the question becomes, well, why is it more this year? We don't have answers to that. But to the extent that FIP helps, you can look at, okay, what's the difference between a guy's ERA and a guy's FIP? And that can kind of give you an idea of how much is either luck-based or, in this case, defense-based. We do know that if a team has great defense, a ball in play is more likely to turn into an out than if a team has bad defense. And we know the Dodgers do have very good defense. They are very good, among the best in baseball, at turning balls in play into outs. Some of that is great defenders. Some of it, actually a lot of it, is great positioning. And so the Dodgers do that. The one maybe pitfall in comparing FIP and ERA for relievers is that ERA isn't always a super reliable way of measuring a reliever's effectiveness, because if you come in with a runner on first and two outs and you give up a double to let the run score and then get the third out, your ERA stays 0, and yet you didn't do your job. But the way the Dodgers bullpen has been used this year, Dave Roberts hasn't. I don't feel like it's been an inordinate amount of guys coming in with the bases full of guys and trying to put out fires. Every once in a while, Evan Phillips is a good example of a guy who's done that some, but for the most part, he's tried to give them clean innings and stuff. And it's a decent approximation. So if we look at FIP versus ERA for Dodgers relievers, there are a few guys who stand out. Craig Kimbrell, for one, his FIP is 259. His ERA is 436. According to walks, strikeouts, and home runs, Craig Kimbrell's having a pretty darn good year. And according to actual results, he's not. That's definitely not part of Steven's question, because we're talking about relievers who have been helped. And Craig Kimbrell has not been helped by anything this year, defense or otherwise. But if you look at like Evan Phillips, he's got a 129 ERA. His FIP is 218. So yeah, he's outperforming his FIP, but 218 is very, very good. And so he's been very good, maybe helped by the defense a little bit. Phil Bickford, bad ERA, bad FIP. Brewstar Gratterall, 316 ERA, 312 FIP, almost perfectly in line. Alex Vesia, kind of the same boat, 263 ERA, 244 FIP. David Price is actually maybe a beneficiary of good defense or whatever, because his 243 ERA is quite a bit better than his 345 FIP. And so whether that's defense, whether that is luck of the draw of having a low BABIP like he does, it's tough to tell. Caleb Ferguson, 127 ERA, 279 FIP. You and I have talked a couple times about Caleb Ferguson and how, maybe the sparkling ERA is a little bit deceiving, and it might be a little bit, but 279 is still pretty darn good. And you'll take that in a reliever. Chris Martin, 186 ERA, 199 FIP. He's been just as good as it seems like he has been. And that's all the relievers on the active roster. Let's see, Yency Almonte maybe was a big beneficiary. His 115 ERA is a whole lot better than his 328 FIP. Whether that means that we should expect a regression when he comes back or not, I don't know. But there's nothing that really jumps out and says these relievers are a product of the defense. I think for the most part, it's some good pitchers pitching pretty well. And if anything, there's a couple examples of guys being pretty unlucky.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. But the thing of the matter with the Dodgers is, for the most part, what they do best is limit hard contact. And when you limit hard contact, you do get unlucky sometimes because balls drop in. And I mean, obviously, it goes either way. Even if you give up hard contact, you might get a line drive right at somebody. But for the most part, limited hard contact, it might feel a little bit more unlucky, but for the most part, the Dodgers do a good job. They don't necessarily have the strikeout guys like some bullpens do, but those guys can get strikeouts when they need to, and they have the guys that can do it. And Gratterall's up to his strikeouts since coming back. We'll see if that remains to be a trend. Vesia is up to his strikeouts recently, so that's a good sign. And then you got Trinan's wasn't a strikeout guy, turned into a bit of a strikeout guy, so you would imagine that's gonna hopefully stay the same there. And yeah, it's just a matter of how things go. But for the most part, you got to feel confident in what the Dodgers have.
Yeah, absolutely.
We actually got another question as we're recording right now. So from Scott Bryson, he wants us to talk about the different strategies with farm systems and locking up young players. He said the Padres burned up their farm to land Soto, Hader, Bell, etc. Atlanta's locking up all their young guys long term. What benefits, drawbacks come with those approaches, and how do they compare with the Dodgers strategy of maintaining flexibility while signing only a few guys long term?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The Braves approach is, it makes sense, especially for a team that wants to limit their expenditures. But there's a lot of risk in what the Braves are doing, even though you would describe the vast majority of these contracts as team-friendly deals. If Ronald Acuna plays to his potential, he's going to be worth a lot more than he makes. But Ronald Acuna missed most of last year with an injury. Ozzy Albies has missed most of this year with an injury. And as our next question we're going to talk about, guys still get paid when they're hurt. It's and so whether it's injury and effectiveness, I always go back to when the Astros tried this approach, and one of the guys that they signed to a big long deal was Jonathan Singleton, who ended up playing like 10 games in the big leagues and was out of baseball. There's definitely risk here when you're throwing that much money at a young player. You can see it with what the Padres did with Tatis, trying to lock him up. And it wasn't necessarily a team-friendly deal. It was a let's lock this guy up for life deal. And you could make a case that certain recent events have had them reconsidering that contract and or at least hoping that things get a lot better. The Dodgers, while it would be nice if, but imagine if the Dodgers had locked up Cody Bellinger after 2017, after he won the Rookie of the Year, if they had locked him up for 10 years right now, don't you think a lot of people would be saying, we got 4 more years of this, because, Cody Bellinger is hit and miss, or even if they locked him up after his MVP year for 10 years, then you'd be like, oh, we got 8 more years of this. It's not that easy to guess what's going to happen in the future. And most of these team-friendly deals, they still end up, the Rays did it with Evan Longoria and ended up trading him because he still got more expensive than they wanted to pay. And so it's hard to see the Dodgers ever really taking that approach, simply because the Dodgers have enough money to sign guys who are more of a sure thing, whether that's paying their own guys when they hit free agency and they are a sure thing, or more of a sure thing, or it's signing guys like Freddie Freeman, or trading for guys like Mookie Betts. It seems like that's going to remain the Dodgers' approach, rather than saying, "Oh, Dustin May, let's lock him up right now." No, let's see how his career goes and lock him up when the time comes to lock him up.
Yeah, and I can see you look at the Braves, and obviously, Albies, Acuna, now Riley, Harris, all those guys that they've signed. You look at it and you're like, man, they got all these guys locked up for a while. And yeah, it looks good right now, but and there's no reason for the Braves to think it's not going to work out for them. But, like I said, Cody Bellinger is a perfect example. Rookie of the Year, MVP, and then, it's kind of turned into not a disaster, but kind of a disaster. And, realistically, it can go either way. But you do see some of these times and you're like, man, all these teams are getting these team-friendly deals. And you're like, man, I wish I wish the Dodgers could get Bueller and like Julio locked up a couple extra years on top of what they've already had. Yeah, but when it comes to the matter of it, if Walker Bueller comes up and they don't re-sign him, realistically, from what we know as Dodger fans in the last 10 years, there's going to be someone else that comes up behind him, or that guy's already Bobby Miller and he comes up and kind of fills the void. So there's obviously pluses and minuses for everyone. I wouldn't mind if the Dodgers maybe locked up guys here and there, but they've also done it in a different way. Not so much the young guys, but, Chris Taylor, reinvented Chris Taylor. So when it came time, when he was a free agent, he wanted to come back and probably gave him a little bit of a discount. Max Muncy, wanted to stay here. And for the most part, if he has a regular season like he's had in the past, 35 home runs and, middle of the runner guy, then yeah, the 10 mil or 13 mil that they're going to pay him the next 2 years, that's a little bit of a discount. So, they've done it in different ways to be able to sustain what they have. And, it's all comes down to not preference, but just what you can do and how you work it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if we wanted to spend more time on this, we could probably draw a few comparisons between Michael Harris and Yasiel Puig if we wanted to beat that analogy into the dirt. But we don't. We're going to come back in a minute. We've got one more listener question. Then we're going to talk about comparing the hot streaks from 2013, 2017, and this year. So thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. And please keep it Locked On Dodgers. All right, we are back. And one last question from a listener. This one comes from Gus Ponce at Excampopa Gus on Twitter. He says, dumb question for the mailbag. Hey, Gus, no such thing as dumb questions, only dumb podcasts. Does Bueller still get full pay for a rehab year? And this is pretty straightforward answer, although there's a little bit more nuance to it. The short answer is yeah. Guys, baseball contracts are guaranteed. Unlike other sports, you get hurt, great, you signed your contract, you get your money. The difference being Walker Bueller is still in his arbitration years. He still has 2 arbitration years left. He signed a contract before the 2021 season that bought out 2021 and 2022 of arbitration. But then he is eligible for arbitration again this next season, this next offseason. And so we don't know how much money he's going to make next year. And the Dodgers could non-tender Walker Bueller. That's technically an option. They're not going to do that. But, when we talk about contracts being guaranteed, Bueller isn't at the guaranteed contract phase of his career yet. If he has a contract, then it's guaranteed, but he's still at the point where he could be non-tendered instead of offered arbitration. So technically the Dodgers could, but then he's no longer under contract with them, and that's why they won't do it. My guess would be that they're going to negotiate some contract to buy out these last 2 years of arbitration and maybe even the first year of free agency, because there's a chance that Bueller might not want his walk year to be his first year back from surgery. So maybe they come up with a deal where he doesn't get paid much in 2023 when he's not pitching anyway, gets paid a little more in 2024 and decent amount in 2025 before he hits free agency. That would push his free agency back to age 31 instead of age 30. So he might not want to do that. That's a balancing act he's going to have to figure out. The only other nuance on this question is contract insurance, which teams can buy, which the player is going to get paid no matter what. Contract insurance can help them recoup some of the costs of their contract when a guy is hurt. It's doubtful that the Dodgers had any sort of contract insurance on Bueller because his contract he's only making between 5 and 6 million this year. And so it's not likely that they worried about that. The Dodgers print money, and a contract like that, it still goes against their luxury cap number or luxury tax number, no matter what. And so they're not as worried about the actual money as the luxury tax anyway. So they probably didn't have any insurance on him, but bigger contracts often will have some insurance that will recoup some of the money, although that insurance can be pretty expensive and not recoup all the money. So I think that answers all the nuances of that question, right, Vince? All right, last thing for today. I've just been thinking about the Dodgers are 41-9 in their last 50 games, which is the third time. It's the third time in the last 10 years the Dodgers have had a stretch at least that good. I think it's only the fifth or sixth time in baseball history a team has had a 50-game stretch that good, and 3 of those times it's been Dodgers teams in the last decade. And so I was just running some comparisons between those 3 teams. I just want to kind of talk a little bit about those. 2013 Dodgers went 42-8 from June 22nd through August 17th. This one obviously sticks out in a lot of our minds if we were fans back then, because it was somewhat miraculous, mostly because it's the only one of the 3 that took the Dodgers from being a bad team to being a good team. After they lost on June 21st, they were 30-42. They were in last place, and they were 9.5 games out of first place. Yasiel Puig had been called up a few weeks earlier, and revisionist history tells us that Puig got called up and the Dodgers got hot. But really, the Dodgers were, where they were 7-10 in the first 3 weeks or so after he got called up. So they didn't start immediately beating the world. But on June 22nd, they did start.
Ramirez's return that really sparked it.
Hanley Ramirez, that's what it was. June 22nd, the streak started. They didn't lose 2 straight games again until August 18th and 19th after the streak. And by that point, they had turned a 9.5 game deficit into an 8.5 game lead in the division. They never really looked back, although they only went 20-20 the rest of the way after that stretch, but they still won the division by 11 games and did pretty well for themselves. 2017, the Dodgers went 43-7 from June 9th through August 6th. When this one started, they were 2.5 games out of first place. They had been in first the week before, but then had a 3-game losing streak to the Brewers and the Nationals, knocked them out of first place. They were 2.5 games back. And then their streak was their stretch was 51 games. They went 44-7. So depending on what your start date is, if you're looking at a 50-game stretch, it's either June 8th through August 5th or June 9th through August 6th. But either way, they were 43-7 during the 50-game stretch that we're looking at. They won 6 straight to start it off, then lost. Then they won 10 straight before losing to the Angels. They did have 1 2-game losing streak against the Braves at Dodger Stadium. If you'll remember, if you were listening to our old podcast back then, they lost 2 games to the Nationals right before their stretch started. And then they didn't lose 2 games again in a row again until they lost the 2 to the Braves. And I was at all 4 of those games, the 2 against the Nationals and the 2 against the Braves. It was the only 4 Dodger games I went to in a span of a couple months, and they lost all 4 in the middle of a historically good stretch. And I sincerely thought that I was a jinx, but luckily it wasn't my fault. Although I was at Game 7 of the World Series that year. I think that one was the Astros' fault, though. But yeah, so the 2017 had winning streaks of 10, 11, and 9 games in a 6-week stretch. And they went from down by 2.5 games to up by 15.5 games in that 50-game stretch. They also didn't play super well after their great stretch. They went 25-26 the rest of the way. Of course, a lot of that was when they lost 16 out of 17 in late August and early September, but they finished with 104 wins, which was then a team record, and they won the division also by 11 games. And then we got this year's team where they've gone 41-9 in their last 50 games. This is the first one of the 3 that they were already in first place when the good stretch started. They were 1.5 games in first place and 17 games over 500. after they lost 2 games in a row to the Rockies on June 27th and 28th. At that point, 17 games over 500, game and a half lead in the division. Since then, they've had winning streaks of 4, 7, 8, and 12 games, and they've actually scuffled into this 43-7 mark. They're actually only 7-4 in their last 11 games, but they started with a 1.5 game lead and are now ahead by 19.5 games. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if you did the math while I was talking, but all 3 of those teams gained exactly 18 games in the standings during their hot stretch. One team went from 9.5 down to 8.5 up. One went from a game and a half down to 15 or 2.5 down to 15.5 up. And then this one went from 1.5 up to 19.5 up. If you look at things other than wins and losses, the runs scored, this year's team had the best during that stretch. They've scored 296 runs during this 50-game stretch. 2017 was 281, and 2013 was 244 runs scored. Run differential, this year's team wins it. They've outscored their opponents by 150 runs during this stretch. 2017 stretch was 122 runs, and 2013 was 104 runs. And, the most important thing maybe is that neither the 2013 nor the 2017 teams won the World Series, although there were some asterisk-y extenuating circumstances in 2017 and some broken ribsy extenuating circumstances in 2013, as long as you're talking about Hanley Ramirez. But, hopefully this year's team, and the other thing is both of those other teams didn't finish strong after the really good stretch. And some of that's to be expected because you take your foot off the gas a little bit once you've locked up the division. But hopefully this Dodgers team, Dave Roberts said yesterday, he thinks they're good enough that even when they do take their foot off the gas a little bit, he still expects them to be pretty darn successful. And that's kind of what I'm thinking too. If the Dodgers play their last 39 games like their most recent 39, they will go 31-8, which would give them 117 wins on the season, which would be a major league record. They'd have to be just going 21-18 would give them the best record in Dodgers history. So that should be well within reach. And all in all, hopefully this is the year that the hot stretch keeps going and leads to a World Series victory.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, on this day in 2017, the Dodgers had 91 wins. And then we all know the 16 of 17 stretch that went after that in the month of September. But, it's funny because like Bill Plaschke just put out an article saying, Dodgers like slow down type of thing, like whatever. And it's like for the Dodgers, okay, they give Freddie and Trey some days off. That can happen, yeah, here and there. But it's not like their bench, everyone on their bench is basically hitting right now. Hanser's been hitting well recently. You got Gallo, you got Trace, you got whoever, even Barnes, whatever. But even Barnes had the home run and a hit last night. So it's not like the Dodgers can intentionally like slow themselves down. They'll 6-man rotation, guys get some time off here and there. That's really all they can do. But there's really no point in them there's nothing else they can do. So if they just play relatively well, they're gonna break the record for the Dodgers. If they continue this torrid pace, they're gonna compete with the Mariners for 116 wins, and none of it's going to matter when it comes to October because it just matters what you do once that calendar flips and once the playoffs are here. There's no more hot streaks. It's just you hopefully to start one when the games start.
Although because of the new playoff setup, this is actually the first year where regular season record actually does have tangible benefit in the postseason because you get to skip a series. So that's good. But yeah, then beyond that, it just means playing well in October. And the best chance to do that is to be healthy and to have good players on your team. And we know the Dodgers have good players. The only question is the health. All right. I think that does it for today, right?
That does do it for today.
Hope so, because we're already longer than we're supposed to be. Hope nobody tell David Locke. Yeah, that's going to do it for us for today and for this week, right? Today's the last episode of the week. So Dodgers going to Miami for a 4-game series. Dustin May against Sandy Alcantara on Saturday should be a lot of fun and hopefully the same kind of fun that the last Sandy Alcantara start against the Dodgers was. But thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, where Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I'm on Twitter at Snider, and the DMs are open in all of those places. You can also reach out to us via email at lockedondodgers@gmail.com or by voicemail or text at 323-863-LOCK-5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you on Monday.
Have a good one.